So, welcome to the Gravitas Podcast Series, where we're going to be exploring the trends shaping industries today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Abigail Cleanis, and today we're diving into one of the most competitive and fast evolving sectors within our economy, quick service restaurants, also known as QSR. Today, we're joined by two incredible guests, Rafael and Johann. Rafael is a creative and digital communications leader who's helped brands like Subway, DHL Express, and Hilton build platforms and tell stories that truly connect people in meaningful ways. At Subway, he led digital content strategy and execution, including rebuilding a global extranet for 300,000 franchisees and restaurant team members. He also launched a podcast to strengthen engagement and built a film studio for content creation. Having managed award-winning projects of all sizes, Rafael believes great communication should be focused on clarity, connection, and community. Joining him today is Johann, the co-founder and CEO of uKnomi, an AI-driven marketing in the moment platform that helps quick service restaurants recognize and personalize interactions with every guest. He brings over 2 decades of experience driving digital innovation across retail, healthcare, manufacturing, and the food service industry. Johann has led startups and global teams across Africa and North America, combining strategy and technology to create real impact. Welcome, Rafael and Johann. It's great to have you both here today.
Thanks, Abigail. Nice to be here.
Great. Thank you so much. It's our pleasure.
Okay, so let's jump into it. I was thinking first we can start with the big picture. So quick service restaurants have always been about efficiency and affordability, but the industry looks quite different today than it did a few years ago. So I'm wondering, from your perspectives, how would you describe the current state of the QSR industry? What exactly is driving demand, and how are brands differentiating themselves in this market? Raf, maybe you can start us off and then we'll hand it over to Johann.
Sure. So I think the QSR industry right now is challenged but resilient, which is really interesting. It's a really interesting place to be. There's plenty of headwinds, plenty of opportunities. I think the unstable state of the economy is, of course, shifting how people dine out. Getting away from home to dine out is getting to be a lot more expensive, even if it's just going to a fast food restaurant. So the QSR industry is stuck in this interesting cycle of focusing on value and convenience. And we'll talk a little bit about value in a sec, but also you have to bear in mind, menu prices are up and, traffic to a lot of the restaurants is not gone. It's just cautious. If people are eating out, I think they're doing so a lot more intentionally. And so in a lot of ways, what QSR brands are having to do is focus on value and not just what is the value of the product, like am I getting a discount or a coupon or something that makes it cheaper for me to dine out. That's an obvious one and a big focus, and you've seen plenty of brands focusing on that. But also, what is the actual overall experience of dining out? The vibe, the how does the restaurant make you feel? QSR brands have to adapt themselves to the changing needs of that intended audience. And even as you factor in other things like Gen Z and their increasing real estate in the influencer space, the value aspect starts to take on a whole new meaning. I think Gen Z spends something like 3 to 4 hours on social media. And I saw somewhere it said about half of them say that social content directly influences where they eat. So there's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities there. And that's before you even factor in AI, which I know Johann will have plenty to say on the topic. So I'll let him speak for a little bit before we go into how some of the brands are I think, adapting to this, but that's my take on that first part of the question.
Yeah. Rafi, I think we're seeing the same kind of things, and I'll talk more from not my market perspective, but what we're kind of experiencing at customers. And the first thing that's evident is what you're saying is there's evolution or evolving consumer expectations, right? So it used to be about value was fast, cheap, convenient, right? Now we are seeing this whole, one part, the digital engagement around it, but also then they kind of expecting speed with personalization, which is, one of those things, make it relevant to me, make that experience and that value relevant to me. And there's some leaders in that that's just driving that forward. So that expectation is just going to grow with, hey, but this is how my experience was at the restaurant next door. So I think that's a big trend, and brands and operators still coming to grips with what exactly that is and how they will adopt to it. The second, and this is maybe just an obvious thing, but in QSR specifically, we've seen such a shift in the channels, right? So it's now totally dominant, that drive-through mobile delivery, especially again the Gen Zs. My kids love to just order food to home, and I'm like, why can you pay so much just for one drink or an ice cream, right? And so I think operators are also dealing with more things in these new channels and formats that brings new problems. So kind of the team they had that was spread out and focusing on certain things now have to deal with a whole bunch more of things. So that makes it, I think, challenging for them. So overall, that is it. We see a need to support this or to adopt to this, where you kind of need to bridge the service and experience gap. So teams have been heavily focused on the process and speed. Now they're also being expected to greet more friendly and be more interactive with the customer, right? And that's complicated. And becoming more data-led in terms of dealing with these challenges are partly also something that the brands need to leverage to know they don't have bigger teams to deal with all of these new things. So where do you focus? You need to understand data and be data-led. And then more than ever, understand what your customer wants and what their expectation is. So I think overall, that's the things that pop up for us.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on what you said to bring it back to the latter half of Abigail's question, where it talks about how some of the brands are navigating some of these challenges. Because again, knowing that AI is the elephant in the room around a lot of this, one of the ways that I've seen, both from having been at Subway and reading about other brands, is this notion of simplifying the experience whenever possible. There's a lot of talk about back to basics and menu simplification, because those things have a way of easing operations, integrating well with AI, taking care of your employees, especially with labor challenges. And you can look at like Denny's. They actually cut back on customizations, and they say for them it worked to bring in profits. Subway had the Subway series where they took the chef-inspired menu to try and make it so that, yes, you have build your own, but you can say, give me the number 1 and the number 33 or whatnot. And then other people like McDonald's simplify their menu, but still increase prices. So they're trying to navigate it in really fascinating ways. And one of the interesting things that happens from an operations standpoint, which AI can also help with, is a repurposing of core ingredients, right? In terms of either how things are recommended to customers, or how builds are made, or just how an entire menu is conceived. So I think that's one way that some brands are trying to attack the challenges and also turn them into opportunities.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'll maybe throw another example building on Raf's point is our client Blaze Pizza. They are basically a DIY pizza concept, right? You go in, you customize your toppings. But one of the ways they're improving the speed is for any third party or any online orders, delivery orders, they have in their flagship restaurant, they have a separate oven, because if the pizza is being made for takeout, then people don't need to see it being made in the front of the restaurant. It can be done in the back of the house. So, similar to that, they're working on, if you don't want a DIY pizza, choose from our signature menu, find a spot to sit, scan your QR code and order it, right? You don't need to like go through the whole line like a Chipotle style thing. And
Yeah.
brands are innovating because of these type of cost pressures, because of changing consumer preferences.
And you're highlighting something for me, Kapil, which is the obsession that I think brands need to have on the customer experience. Because like, I'll give you an example. I was at Chicken Kitchen last night, and there were 2 folks behind the line, and I eventually figured this out, but one of them was just focusing on guests who were in the restaurant, and another was only focusing on online orders. But there was no indication in where the other employee was, or anything that was labeled, or like you said, a separate oven to tell you that. So there was a bit of frustration in the line that I was in before folks organically figured out what was going on and why their orders were taking so long. Because really, if you're in the restaurant, it's not 2 people behind the line, just 1. So those are the kinds of things where as brands innovate and try out new things to simplify operations or the menu or integrate AI, you cannot forget what it actually means for the customer's experience. I'm sure Johann would agree. You don't just use AI for the sake of using AI. You still have to be intelligent with how you implement it. And even outside of that, with the example I just gave, it can show up in different ways.
Yeah, for sure. So you guys both spoke a little bit about customization and the role that that plays in engaging customers in different ways. And I'm wondering, what role do you think that this menu development or menu innovation really plays in keeping customers engaged? Raf, maybe you can kick us off, or Johann.
You good, Raf?
Yeah, sure. So menu innovation is one of the core areas where brands can really own their destiny. If you think about all the pressures that exist economically, there's a lot of stuff that's out of your control. And, we would talk a lot at Subway about how there's no one silver bullet to solve all these problems. The closest you can get to that in some ways is what you do in terms of the experience you present to customers, by which it means, if they're there to dine out, what are you offering them and how are you offering it to them? So menu innovation is where they can own their destiny. And ideally, they build out these innovations at their core, not just as limited time offers. So there's an interesting thing with Chili's, for example. They went viral for, what was it called? The Triple Dipper, I think, with one of those crazy, gooey, craveable looking foods that my arteries just crush when I see them, but it looks great and it plays well on social media. And that's a different kind of innovation than something like providing healthier options. But I think the philosophy is the same. Can you lean into it all the way to make it a part of your actual, let's call it, restaurant culture? Because otherwise, I think guests can sniff out the authenticity pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think I can add just more around, besides the innovation, how do you then take it to market, right? There is those things, but that's far and few between where you get this viral thing happening on a menu item, which is great when it happens. But the parts that we've also seen is just how does the stores, especially franchisees, as you go down that chain and operations, deal with these new menu innovations, right? So there's a new item that comes up, or even LTO, seasonal side. How do you get the teams to know what is the message behind that menu item, right? So when they offer it to a customer, or often I go out to a restaurant, I ask, what's your suggestion? What would you like to have? So when these menu innovations come into place, make sure that the team knows why and what is associated with it, so that they can sell it, right? They can position it to customers. They can understand the value in the comments and the feedback, and use that to say other customers say things about this new menu item. So you just need to make sure that you amplify the traction and reach your goal with what you do with that menu item to get out there.
I love that you brought up the franchisee experience, because I think we would be remiss if we didn't focus on that as well. Even as we're saying, be obsessed with the customer experience, the stewards of that customer experience have to be taken care of as well. And yes, we of course talk about the labor and the folks who have to be behind the line and making sure that they're well taken care of. And that's better done so if the franchisees, in the case of many QSR brands, are just as empowered and feeling just as supported. So when you talk about menu innovation and you compare that to menu simplification, there's an interesting relationship there that's worth exploring, because in the end, it still means I have to learn something new. In a perfect world, you talk about back to basics, you roll back some things and simplify menu items, that's fine, but you are still changing how business was done. And if you combine that with menu innovation, where you genuinely are introducing something new, that's why I said before, if you can integrate it into your restaurant culture and the restaurant experience for guests and get the franchisees to understand and buy in on that, you're going to have a lot better success, because you'll actually have true advocates and true believers. And that requires a lot of two-way dialogue between franchisee and franchisor.
Yeah, just the last point maybe from my side on that. I think with the economic pressures that Ralph referred to, there's also the intent of brands to say, well, how do we better leverage certain day parts? In the past, in easy times, they don't care so much about it, right? Because they maybe focus on other challenges. But when there's pressure on the market, they kind of start to think about, okay, where is my day part that's not performing? That specifically, can I do something in that day part to? So traditionally, you would see some chains that just focus on very specific things that would say, well, maybe we should add coffee on the menu, right? So you get a lot of cross competition now as well. In terms, think about McDonald's entering that space. So yeah, ultimate, I also think that menu innovation goes along with where do you find your biggest opportunities or pressures in that day part.
Yeah, for sure. You guys both spoke about some of the trends that we're seeing, and then also some of the challenges that come with these changing consumer expectations as well as economic pressures. And my question to you is, what do you see as some of the most pressing challenges facing the industry today, and how are leading brands navigating those challenges?
Johann, I'd actually be really interested to hear what you have to say first, because you're obviously coming at this from an AI perspective to some of those challenges.
Yeah. So, well, I think a lot of this is not my perspective is not new in terms of the challenges. I think it resonates with what we've been talking about. There's margin pressure. There is things happening around external factors, food pricing. We know we've come through a period of big inflation. That was the focus and the talking points, and what brands were under pressure on was a big part of it. And the second part is just labor and consistency. I think that's something that we've been struggling with for a long time. It's not going to go away. It's going to be there, right? So especially more so with newer generations, right? They have a different approach to certain things. And I have two kids that's going through that, so I have first-hand experience in that. I think most operators would probably say those two are some of the in the top five, definitely. I think the other part that we are seeing now is just on the innovation side is how quickly that is evolving. And that is challenging, right? So restaurants traditionally have been lagging on when it comes to technology. If you compare them to retail, right, they're a follower, they're not a leader. But I think some of these pressures has made restaurants think more about, or made this industry think more about, well, in which categories or which technology areas can we lead? And for the past 2-3 years, I think there's been a lot about, we've heard about AI, there's something, but we struggle to come up with a use case or a valid use case for us. And that's important. You need to be able to justify and know what you want to do with it. And that I see that shifting into, okay, now we need to start to prioritize, and we need to figure out how to deal with it, and we need to potentially get ahead or stay up with the packet. So, we saw that during COVID with online ordering, right? So it just went like this, and brands were struggling to get it rolled out. It was such a big, turning point maybe for the industry there, that suddenly everybody had to have an app or something, be online. And some people struggled with it, right? So, and I think we're seeing almost the next wave of that with AI that says, okay, we know there's certain values, but how do we, and there's lots of offerings out there, right? Where do we focus? Where do we start? And that's an important point in terms of what I think CIOs and CEOs are sitting with their CIOs and struggling with, is like, okay, how do we build the business case? How do we prioritize? There's 20 things. How do we just adopt with it all?
Yeah, and Johann, you made me think of something else that I've seen from firsthand experience, because yes, there are the external factors that are very visible: rising food costs, rising labor costs, or even just the difficulty of getting even more employees hired or working at the hours that are needed. Those are huge challenges. And you've got tariffs and shifting consumer expectations. Those are all external that require creative solutions that are going to vary by brand. But there's also, more to your point, Johann, a lot of internal challenges, because as companies and brands are trying to scale up to the future and make themselves future proof, their systems internally are not always equipped to do that. There's a lot of brands and companies who have, homegrown or custom built systems that require massive investment to upgrade. And sometimes they need to be dismantled. If you're talking now about some of the things you referenced, Johann, and you are going out to integrate AI into your mobile app or into your POS, but your system isn't prepared for it, which I think a lot of brands run into that challenge because COVID accelerated a lot of the progress that needed to happen faster than brands could invest in them. There's going to be a lot of challenges, worthwhile challenges to address, but challenges nonetheless, especially because of how much, frankly, investment they require to address.
Absolutely. Just to add on to that, I think it's not just the age of technology, but also the management of that technology. So one of the key things we deal with day in, day out is, when we look at deploying one of our capabilities, for instance, is suggestive selling, right? Helping the team to focus on the right stuff. That requires a proper menu structure and a properly defined menu structure managed. And it's surprising how many brands would not have that kind of master data in place, right? So I think with AI, sure, AI can handle a lot of unstructured data, and again, there's maybe AI solutions to that, but I think ultimately the tech thinking, managing the underlying layers and people around the technology is as critical as the new fancy technology that you implement. They all just work off the data that they're being fed. That's the reality.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting and important to note that it's not often a lack of willingness, but sometimes just resources, because I've worked with some incredibly intelligent and wonderful people, especially at my time at Subway, who really just want to just innovate as much as they possibly can and just have to overcome some of the challenges that come built in with technology.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen massive investment into tech and innovation within the QSR industry, from digital ordering apps to loyalty programs, AI-powered drive-thrus, and even I've seen robotics in the kitchen becoming something that is starting to be seen within the industry. So I'm curious, which technologies do you see having the biggest impact on QSR today, and how are they changing both the back-end operations as well as the customer experience? Johann, maybe you can kick us off with this one.
I may be a little bit biased, so I actually wanted to say let Raf go for it first, but that's okay. I'll dig into it somewhat. So I think what we are experiencing is a converging digital ecosystems. We way better off today than even a year ago, just in terms of how much people have opened up their systems and able to integrate, right? Because it was also some examples in my previous industry in supply chain and in retail that I was involved with. It was always this thing about, is it rip and replace, or can we build on top of what we have? So I think that is getting a lot better. That integrability is there because people see the value and the need for it, and that's more in line with the thinking of, let's say, where technology development and vendors in technology is at now. So I think the silos are being broken down when it comes to technology. Definitely we'll still be talking about AI 10 years from now. So it's going to be a phased thing, and a lot of that would become the new operating layer. So just with this converging, will the traditional point of sale system just be a point of sale system? I think that's going to change. It's going to change in the next few years around AI coming in and these technologies kind of existing and being able to build on the capabilities of the one into the other one. I think in the short, or not in the short term, but in the foreseeable future, agentic AI, which is just, currently a lot of it is, oh, we have an AI agent answering the phone and taking orders. Or, we've seen a lot of, unfortunately, pilot projects that didn't go right, where, we'll have the voice AI order taking, and someone orders 10 million bottles of water and it says, okay, let's go. It's going to get smarter. AI is going to get smarter. So I think overall, we'll see a maturing in that space as well. And it'll become connecting tissue. That's the big part. With the agentic AI, we'll move from the part of just taking the order, or helping you with inventory management, kind of more of the higher level kind of analytic type of jobs, into starting to make more decisions and actioning certain things. And that's the trend that I see AI going into, and a lot of opportunity into that. Obviously there's robotics. I think we're still a little bit ways ahead from that. That'll take a few years until we get that perfected. And there's always the human touch, right? The guests that's part of that experience. Certainly where we are today, and that again might change in future, people still want the human touch. They still want to talk to someone. We've seen that at a specific customer that we dug into, where kind of the baby boomers and more my generation, they still want to talk to someone. There's the older generation that goes through a drive-through, and that's part of their conversation of the day, right? It's part of the engagement that they get. They're not just there for the coffee or for the food. So I think we'll have to learn how to balance between trying to let AI do everything versus what is really centered around what our guest experience is and what our guests expect.
Yeah, and because the AI revolution is inescapable, as we mentioned, it's kind of the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
The interesting flip side to that is that, for all intents and purposes, it is a massive beta program that we are all participating in, and it is very public, because both the successes and the failures are in the spotlight. And it's really, I think it's important to focus on what that means for internal and external purposes. The external part is the customers, right? We've talked about that a couple of ways. You mentioned the AI drive-thrus and how you can see the idea. You can see the gold standard of how we'll just like finesse everything and make things so much better. But yep, someone can order 10 million water bottles by accident. You've got to factor in people's accents. You got to factor in the weather, what's going on, and hell, it's just technology to maintain in the first place. So like the idea is there, the execution is very much a work in progress. Still worth investing in, but I think this is where brands have to be careful about how they end up deploying it, for the reasons that we were just saying. Internally, I personally feel there's a bit more opportunity to leverage some of these emerging technologies in a way that can make things better. So inventory management, optimizing how orders are fulfilled, predictive orders, upsells, the kinds of things that I would argue are a bit more invisible, right? The things that make the operations easier. That to me seems like the pathway towards innovating in this beta in a way that can make the customer experience better, by way of also making the brand's own experience, the franchisees, the frontline workers, better as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'll just chime in here, and Johann, you probably will agree with me based on your similar background in retail and supply chain. So I remember early part of my career, this is 2010 timeframe. In retail, we started talking about this concept of omni-channel, multi-channel selling, and then came omni-channel, right? And brands started thinking about, okay, how can we connect our e-commerce engine with the order management system, which is also connected with our store ordering system, with the warehouse management, the distribution network, and the full, TMS layer, so that if I'm a shopper at, let's say, Nordstrom or Target, I go into Target, my experience, the prices I see, the promotions I get are exactly same to what if I'd have shopped through the Target mobile app or through Target.com. And I think that QSR has generally been at least half a decade behind historically, like as compared to retail in terms of digital innovation. So these concepts like omni-channel or digital connectedness or a single view of the customer or the guest, those were relatively new. And I remember working at Subway in 2019. That's when they first piloted the third-party ordering with DoorDash. Raf, yours and mine, our common connection actually piloted that project. And they used a aggregator called Olo. And thank God they did that. They built that foundation because then a year later, COVID hit, right? And they had that foundation. So long way of saying that COVID has accelerated the digital investments. And I also see that there are consumers like myself, I would call myself old school, is when I walk into a McDonald's, I actually want to place the order with a human versus I would imagine Gen Zs are more comfortable with playing with a kiosk, right? And there's also studies that say that people who are ordering through the kiosk are actually, they tend to spend a bit more. They have higher check size because there's no human on the other side kind of judging them if they get an extra cookie or if they, get an extra large drink. So it's very interesting how QSRs brands are like leveraging technology, but also balancing on how they present the experience to consumers of different age groups or demographics, for example.
I can personally attest to ordering one too many cookies from a kiosk. Absolutely. Shamelessly.
Just while I'm here, swipe away. Just one point on what Rav said just before this is, I think in selecting AI, it's a beta test. Absolutely more safe to do it on things that is not directly customer facing or guest facing. It becomes social media flourishes of that. And the second part is we've kind of developed these, or not developed, I won't say we own it, but we just define these operational pillars, right? So if you talk about, let's focus on the operational side, internally to what our organization does, that has an external impact in guest experience. We kind of ask potential customers or just in talking to prospects that think about this as what do you think your biggest problems or your biggest opportunities are? And think around it, is it a speed of service? So in terms of my service process, that would include probably inventory in there. And the second one being order quality, being how it's being prepared. Also, do I have missing ingredients? That's actually more where inventory would fall into. Is it about the guest engagement, guest interaction, where you think there's opportunities? Is it about your selling intelligence? But kind of try to put it around something that you prioritize that and say, this is where we can get the biggest benefit out of it. And then you kind of start and have that as your decision tree when you make these decisions. Don't just go after the shiny new AI tool because it looks so fancy. What are the problems it's gonna solve for you, and can you quantify and achieve the value is very important.
Yeah, I'll just add to that real quick is that there's a tendency that retail QSR executives, they would go to an industry conference, come back with 1,000 ideas, and they want to do things today, right? They want to deploy AI for everything. Our message to clients typically is fix the foundation, fix your data, fix your processes, because as much as you can deploy AI agents, it's not going to fix gaps in your process. And also don't lose sight of training the human element or highlighting the human element in all of your interactions that the guests have with your brand. So it's very tempted, like you said, chasing the shiny new object. It's very tempting to do that. But we always advise our clients to first fix the foundation, take an incremental approach, ROI-based approach, and then think of a scaling strategy. And it takes time and intention to do that.
And actually, some of those innovations, especially around integrating AI, can reveal some of the gaps you're talking about, Kapil, where you may think you have set up your processes the right way, to scale to accommodate what AI can do for you before you realize we're not ready for this from a staffing perspective, technology perspective, operations perspective, et cetera. So you end up playing catch up in two ways: to integrate it in the first place, and then once it's there, you create sort of new challenges for yourself to address. And again, I think we can all agree it's worthwhile to focus on this. But it is good, as you were saying, Kapil, to keep in mind what challenges those can bring about.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely with technology comes a lot of risk, and unfortunately, some problems do arise when we don't have systems in place that are prepared to engage these new technologies. So my question to both of you is, what are some of the biggest pitfalls or challenges you've seen within the QSR space when implementing these new innovations?
I'll start here because I have one example. It's actually similar to what Johann was saying before around retaining the human element and not just doing innovation for the sake of it. Again, you will find pitfalls if at any point the focus shifts off the customer experience. Because at that point, it's just shiny toy territory. And it's also considering that not everything these new tools can provide is necessarily going to be as smooth as you expect it, not just from a tech perspective, from, again, the customer perspective. So for example, I've read about how there are more restaurants integrating kiosks, especially, at the QSR level. But there are some unexpected issues, because it's not just, the fun side where it's like, yeah, the check is higher because you can add a few more items that you wouldn't if there was a human there. But sometimes, especially with age gaps, you have people who are comfortable and less comfortable with the experience. And what ends up happening? These long queues start to form behind customers who are using the kiosk. And it creates this weird social pressure. Then you're just trying to order your food, but you know that you're kind of angering a whole line of people who are hungry because you can't figure it out. Or maybe sometimes the kiosk experience reset for some way, or like payment system isn't working. And that impacts value. Going back to what we were saying before, value is not just discounts and coupons, but the overall restaurant experience. I went to a McDonald's once that was only kiosks. That's it. Kiosks and drive-thru. Probably the worst experience I had, because we put in an order on the kiosk after waiting in the queue, which took forever, because there were like maybe 3 of them and a lot of people there. And also, I think they were prioritizing the drive-thru because there was a lot more traffic there. They had a ready order menu that wasn't working, because my order never came up there. So I had to interact with a human to ask, like, where is it? And they're like, oh yeah, it's over here. I don't know why it's coming up. Let me try and reset the system. So you just sit there. We're just sitting on the benches, waiting for the food. And there is, I think, especially when it comes to quick service restaurants, the expectation is it's quick. You're not there to get a gourmet 4-star meal. You're getting a burger. So when you look at that versus how much it costs you versus what you had to do to get it and the waiting you're doing, you start to question yourself. So those are the kinds of pitfalls, I think, Abigail, around the customer experience, and being very careful about what the impact of the innovation is on the guest experience.
Yeah, I have another more basic even example of that is when they started to when Starbucks, and they fixed that now, but when they they're very they got very good traction on their app, right? So it's the right format, it's the right thing for that. But I've personally experienced it where I'm coming into the Starbucks and it's not that busy, and I've ordered my drink, and then I wait, and there's 10 or more orders that comes out, and people just walking in and picking it up, and I'm like, well, I'm waiting for 15 minutes for my coffee. It's not because they are not doing anything, but they just have so many other orders that they're fulfilling now. So and I think that problem has largely been solved now across more balancing and prioritizing of orders in store than online. But that we're going to see a lot more things like that happen as people kind of maybe have not thought through the whole entire customer experience of when that happens, right? Both operationally as well as the digital side. So it's kind of this connection of digital, and I think it falls in the same category that Ralph highlighted. So yeah, we'll see a lot of that.
And it actually connects to something we talked about earlier. If you compare the experience I talked about at Chicken Kitchen and what you just talked about at Starbucks versus what Kapil brought up around Blaze Pizza, where there's a dedicated, at least more on the operations side, oven for pizzas from online orders. That's, I think, the kind of thoughtful approach that more brands should try and adopt. This is something at Subway. There's a lot of really good and smart folks who are actively tackling this problem. Kudos to them for that, because it's a very important one. You want to increase digital orders. You want to lean into innovation, but you know that those are going to show up in a physical restaurant. So how do you manage it then? And some franchisees were able to by having like the dedicated staff. And I've been to some Subway restaurants where I think they had enough staff to make it so you didn't feel the difference between them. Because clandestinely, someone was focusing on the online orders, but there were enough folks there to keep the line moving along. Clearly, the Chicken Kitchen example I gave earlier was the opposite of that, because they only had two, which goes back to the conversation about labor challenges. And I think it's important to frame this up as not finger pointing or blaming anyone, especially on the front line. On the franchisor side as well, because again, a lot of people are doing the very best that they can to innovate, afford these investments and such. And this goes back to this idea of being a mass scale beta program that everyone is participating in.
Yeah, sorry, that made me think about this other aspect that we really focus on is the human and AI partnership, right? So think about both, not just the tech guys going after how smart can we build the AI. Think about it as the human and AI partnership, and for us it's a mantra, right? It's human led and AI enabled. It's not just fully automated. I think the days of us seeing fully automated restaurants, even on QSR level, is still way ahead in the future. For where we are, and I can't predict that now, but for where we are now, it's definitely AI can empower and make teams better, but it's still the team that's leading that whole engagement with the guest.
Yeah, a sword is only as good as the one who wields it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So we've spoken a little bit about the current state of the QSR industry, some of the emerging trends we're seeing, the different innovations, as well as the challenges that we see with this rise in tech and innovation as well. And I'm wondering, looking ahead, if we were sitting down 5 years from now, what do you think the QSR industry would look like then?
Let me start this one, Johann, because I think since you're on the side, you are actually very much at the driver's seat of a lot of this, which is incredible. If 5 years from now, in a perfect world, the future of QSR brands would be focused on some of the stuff we've talked about here, value and connection, and an obsession with the customer experience. That has to be, I think, the tale for today, tomorrow, the future, whenever it is. So in a perfect world, QSR brands, quick service restaurants, would be quicker and more personal, something Johann said earlier that I really liked, because the focus on taking all these innovations, especially AI, is and should be in service of the guests and what makes the value of the restaurant and the value of dining out in the first place, especially as it may continue to get more expensive for all we know. Those things are critical to focus on. So ideally, AI would allow brands in the future to automate the routine stuff, the inventory management, processing payments, or some of the upsells and things like that. And that gives space for allowing humans to do what humans do best: hospitality, empathy, and therefore providing a better value for the dining experience. I think there's going to be some practical stuff where some brands will change their physical designs to address some of the challenges, especially economically, to be more off-premises oriented. That can just help with integrating some of those innovations as well. So I do suspect there's going to be some impact to the actual physical footprint of a lot of these brands. But net, in the end, it has to be in service of the customer experience, uplifting the folks who work on the front line, right? Providing the resources, training and such that the frontline workers need and franchisees need to implement these changes, and then good leadership at the franchisor level to have the bird's eye view of how all this stuff can work together, how all these innovations, all these improvements, the two-way listening with franchisees, paying attention to the guest experience, and so on and so forth, how that can all be part of their plans going forward. So in essence, QSR in the future, it's not just about eating. I think it's about creating a good value experience. You want to feel good going back to dine out. If you know it, especially if you know it's going to cost you more, would it make you still feel good? Does it feel worthwhile?
Yeah, to pick up from that, I think our area of expertise is in the QSR industry, so not necessarily dining, but it's about what's happening at that point of service in the restaurant and in hospitality. From that context, I think we are going to see a big emphasis and a differentiator by when you talk about that value and experience, it needs to be personalized. So, which is an incredibly hard thing to do, right? You cannot treat every guest different, but you can be better at kind of categorizing and treating some behavioral traits from guests similarly. So I think for what we see, personalization is going to be a differentiator. We talk about the Gen Zs coming up and kind of they just go and buy something that they've seen somewhere, but they belong to a group and they want to be kind of associated with that. So personalization, the second big thing of the future, I believe, is this. Kapil spoke about omni-channel. I think what we see is how much better it'll get. Doesn't matter how you place the order, but your experience will be very similar. Again, personalized, but you're gonna get that same feel. So it'll be connected from that perspective. If you think about the drive-through, currently if I order on my phone, I can go pick it up, but usually there's a dedicated parking spot, or we used to, during COVID, we had all these QR code boards pop up and you scan the QR code because you don't want to go inside. And luckily all of those are gone, but the experience is different. Currently, if I order on the app, some of the leading brands are getting it right now. But if there's no one in the queue, why can't I not just go and pick it up in the drive-thru? Why should I stop there? That convenience aspect of that. So I think that blending of different channels, but actually giving you the same experience and giving you options. But it's smart options because I'm not going to, or even if I'm in the queue and I wait longer, can I just get a message that says, hey, you can pull around, you only want a coffee, right? You don't want you're not standing in the queue to wait for something or a water, right? So pull around. There is, I think also this whole process of, let's call it making it frictionless, intelligent, and personal is for me just summarizing what's happening in the next 5 years, considering innovation and technology.
Well, you mentioned something earlier that I think is underpinning everything that you said, which is central to the customer experience, which is, if I'm putting even my marketing hat on from my agency days, consistency. So, if you were approaching this from a marketing perspective, are you as a brand showing up consistently in each of the platforms? Your tactics and strategies may be different, but is it still the core of the brand there? I think the same applies to QSR here. As you were saying, especially as you integrate personalization, is it a consistent and good experience? Meaning there's a lot of value there from whether I order through a third-party tool, through the official mobile app, going into the restaurant, whether it's a kiosk, drive-through, or in person. A focus on the consistency through that experience so the customer, again, feels good about having gone there in the first place. So that I think that degree of consistency is really, really important for, as I kind of said earlier, today, tomorrow, and in the future, and ideally bolstered by emerging technologies like AI.
Yeah. And the key point in personalization, Raf, you would agree, is or the biggest challenge, I believe, that everybody sees the value and wants to do it, but I think at the core of the problem, it's, well, how do we recognize the guest, right? So if we cannot personalize that experience specifically in person, if we don't have a way to recognize guests. And then along with the recognition comes responsibility of privacy and all of those things, right? So I think we certainly solved that for parts of the QSR service, but I see some more innovation coming across the industry from how do we better we call it the unknown but understood guest, right? They're not part of your loyalty program. They're not, but they have a specific trait or something around them that you can't identify them, but you can recognize them, and therefore you can personalize that experience. And it's not just mass personalization to time of day or things like it's true personalization to a customer's behavior, which is an interesting problem that's starting to be solved, and that's going to open up a lot of interesting aspects in terms of this experience for customers.
Yeah, because you mentioned earlier the future should be frictionless, which I completely agree with. And when it comes to emerging technologies, there's always that ick factor that's like,
yeah,
should this AI know me like that? Should I be talking to someone about, I don't know, Barbasol, and suddenly I get an ad for Barbasol? I'm thinking of Minority Report when, Tom Cruise is running through the mall and it's just like recognizes him from walking in and starts serving him personalized ads, which, was a scene well ahead of its time.
Yeah.
There was that saying in Silicon Valley of move fast and break stuff. And means a lot of attention wasn't given to the repercussions of that. So to keep the focus, I would amend a lot of what we've said here to really highlight that point, for consistency and convenience, but also making it frictionless in a way that feels, it's going to say wrong to be, it's going to sound wrong to say organic, but it feels like it makes sense. This is why, to me, a lot of the innovations that will definitely have a pathway to success are those internal ones that take care of operations and inventory management and whatnot, that make it really, really easy to have a better experience because it's streamlined that part. The attempt to replace the human element is where you start to get into really tough waters to navigate. So the more that brands can figure out how to balance that, I think the more successful they'll be.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we've had some really great conversations about the QSR industry generally, as well as where we see that heading in the future. And before we sign off today, I wanted to ask, in 30 seconds or less, if you could summarize one key takeaway that you'd like our listeners to walk away with, what would that be?
I'd say QSR brands today, tomorrow, and in the future, regardless of which emerging technologies they are focused on, have to be obsessed with the customer experience and making sure that they provide a lot of value, not just in terms of affordability and if there's a lot of discounts or coupons or whatnot, but what is the overall restaurant experience? And to get there, you should ideally support and empower the frontline staff and the franchisees that are implementing them to have an overall successful future.